You've heard this line your entire life. Renting is throwing money away. Your parents said it, your uncle said it at Thanksgiving, right between the yams and the unsolicited career advice. That one guy in your econ class who's never read an annual report in his life said it with complete confidence. And here's the thing. It didn't stop there. Your coworker said it. The personal finance influencer with the rented Lambo in his thumbnail said it. The local news anchor doing a segment on getting on the property ladder said it. The sponsored article that popped up in your Instagram feed said it. Your bank's first-time homebuyer guide said it. You've heard it so many times it stopped sounding like an opinion and started sounding like gravity. And look, for a second, part of you nodded. Because it sounds logical. Money goes in, nothing comes back. Wasteful, right? Except here's the thing nobody followed up with. Somebody wrote that line. Somebody funded it, distributed it, and made sure it ended up inside your head, rent-free, no pun intended. Today we're finding out who. And we're running the actual math they hoped you wouldn't. Before we go any further, I need to handle something real quick. Officially, none of this is financial advice. My professor, who also told me markets are perfectly efficient, asked me to say that. What I am doing is showing you the math, so you can make your own call. That's on you. All right, let's get into it. Renting is throwing money away didn't emerge from ancient financial wisdom. Nobody chiseled it into a tablet. It wasn't discovered. It was manufactured, and I can point to the factory. The National Association of Realtors, the NAR, is one of the largest lobbying organizations in the United States. Not largest real estate lobby. Largest lobbying organizations. Period. We're talking about an entity with over 1.5 million members, operating like a well-funded political machine with a single goal. Make sure Americans believe homeownership is the only path to financial dignity. They spend somewhere between $60 and $100 million annually. On politicians, on advertising campaigns, on think tank reports that conveniently conclude what their members need you to conclude. And on shaping the cultural conversation around homeownership. But lobbying is just the visible part. Here's the play that doesn't show up on their public filings. For decades, the industry funded financial literacy programs in schools that happened to emphasize the wealth-building power of homeownership. They partnered with local newspapers and TV stations for those feel-good, first-time homebuyer segments you've seen every spring market since you were a kid. The ones with the smiling couple getting keys in front of a house. They sponsored community workshops hosted by mortgage brokers, where the workshop was free and the sales pitch was the entire point. They also lobbied hard for the mortgage interest deduction, the tax policy that lets you deduct interest paid on your home loan, which made ownership look financially smarter, without anyone having to first run the full numbers on how much that interest actually cost you. Clever move if you already own homes or originate mortgages for a living. Their core product, the thing they sell before they sell any actual house, is not a building. It's a feeling. The feeling that if you're renting, you're losing. Not a fact, a feeling. Because feelings don't require proof. Feelings require repetition. Say it enough times. Get it into enough newspaper columns, enough TV segments, enough conversations between parents and their kids at the kitchen table. Eventually, it stops being their opinion. It becomes common sense. That's the play. That's who wrote the script. And by the way, they weren't alone. Mortgage lenders make interest when you borrow. 30 years of interest, which I'll get to in a minute because the number is genuinely offensive. Title companies make fees when you close. Realtors make commission when you transact. Home inspectors, moving companies, furniture stores, renovation contractors, the local hardware store that suddenly becomes your second home. The entire ecosystem profits from the transaction itself. Every single one of those entities has a structural incentive for you to believe that buying is always smarter than renting. Your long-term financial health? Optional. Your purchase? Necessary for all of them. There's a word for a system that profits regardless of whether you win or lose. And it's not financial advisor. It's the house. When you understand that, the phrase, renting is throwing money away, stops being wisdom. It starts being a sales pitch dressed up as your grandmother's advice. Now here's the first relief point, because I know this is a lot. You didn't fall for it because you're naive. You fell for it because the campaign was good. Multi-billion-dollar industries don't fund bad campaigns. And when your parents repeat that line, they're not lying to you. They genuinely believe it. They heard it from their parents, who heard it from their parents, who heard it during a completely different economic era. Let me put real numbers on different era. In the 1990s, 30-year fixed mortgage rates averaged around 8%, which sounds high, but here's the thing. Median home prices were roughly $120,000 to $140,000. Median household income sat around $40,000. The price-to-income ratio, meaning the number of years of annual income it takes to buy a median home, was around 3 to 1, maybe 3.5. Today, median home price, over $420,000. Median household income, around $75,000. Price-to-income ratio, above 5.5 nationally. And in the cities where most of the actual professional opportunities for young people concentrate, San Francisco, New York, Boston, Los Angeles, Seattle, Austin, that ratio sits somewhere between 8 and 15. So your parents bought during an era when a 22-year-old with a median income could actually save a down payment before their 30th birthday without skipping meals. The math genuinely worked for them. Not because they were smarter or more disciplined, because the ratios were fundamentally different. They're not lying to you. They're playing back a tape recorded in a different decade, handing you the headphones like the song hasn't changed. The belief is sincere. The origin is not. And now you know the difference. But fine. Who cares about the origin story if the math actually holds up? Let's find out if the math holds up. Meet Tyler, 24 years old, makes $58,000 a year, has been grinding for 3 years to build a down payment, skipping vacations, driving the same busted Civic since high school, keeping the old laptop another year, telling himself it's worth it. His parents are proudly sending him Zillow listings every Sunday morning because Tyler's finally going to stop throwing money away on rent. His mom has already mentally decorated the guest room. Tyler does the open houses on Saturday mornings. Puts in an offer. Gets outbid. Puts in another offer. Gets outbid by someone waiving inspection. He waives inspection on the next one because his realtor tells him that's just how the market works right now. He gets the house. $350,000. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms. Needs a little work. The listing says full of potential, which is realtor code for something you'll find out about later. Tyler waived inspection, remember? He finds out about it at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. He does everything else right. Puts down 20%. That's $70,000. 3 years of discipline, gone in one wire transfer. He takes a 30-year mortgage on the remaining $280,000. In 2025, his rate lands at 6.8%. Not a horror story rate, not the peak from 2023, just the current market, the world Tyler actually lives in. Monthly payment, approximately $1,815. Principal and interest. Then add property taxes, which in most U.S. markets runs $300 to $600 a month. Add homeowner's insurance, another $100 to $150. Tyler's building has an HOA because of course it does. Add another $200. And then there's the maintenance call Tyler gets 3 weeks after moving in about the water heater, which is 12 years old and running on vibes and prayers. $1,100. Tyler hadn't budgeted for it because nobody told him about the 1 to 2% rule. That rule. Homeowners should budget 1 to 2% of their home's value annually for maintenance and repairs. On a $350 home, that's $3,500 to $7,000 a year. $290 to $580 per month. Every month. Not just the months when something breaks. Tyler's real monthly housing cost. Roughly $2,500. On a good month. His rent before this? $1,500 a month. Comparable space, comparable neighborhood. No maintenance stress. No surprise bills. No Saturday mornings getting outbid by people with more cash. He's now paying $1,000 more per month. But he's building equity now, so it's fine, right? Here's the part that made me put my head on the desk the first time I ran this. Let me give you a translation. What they say. You're building equity every month. What that actually means, in month 1 of Tyler's mortgage, if you open the amortization table, $243 goes toward owning more of his house. $1,572 goes to the bank as interest. $243 on an $1,815 payment. He's keeping less than 14 cents of every dollar as equity. This is called front-loading. It is not a bug. It is exactly how amortization was designed to work for the lender. In the early years of a mortgage, the vast majority of your payment is interest because the loan balance is highest, and interest is calculated on that outstanding balance. As you slowly reduce the principal, the interest portion gradually shrinks. But gradually is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. You don't hit a genuine equity building pace until you're deep into the second decade of your loan. By the end of year 1, Tyler has made approximately $21,800 in total payments. He owns about $2,900 more of his house than on day 1. The remaining $18,900 was interest. By the end of year 5, he's made $109,000 in payments. His loan balance has dropped by about $21,000. The remaining $88,000 went to the bank. By the end of year 10, Tyler has paid roughly $218,000 total. His remaining loan balance has dropped from $280,000 to approximately $232,000. He's eliminated about $48,000 of principal. The other $170,000 that left his account over 10 years? Interest. Updated translation card. Building equity in year 1. You're renting $243 per month from your own house and paying $1,572 per month to the bank for the privilege. Building equity in year 5. You've handed the bank $88,000 and own $21,000 more of an asset that might or might not appreciate at a useful rate. Building equity in year 10. You've paid $218,000 total and eliminated less than a fifth of your original loan. Feel different when you say it that way? Now zoom out. 30 years. Full picture. Loan amount, $280,000. Total payments over 30 years, approximately $652,000. The difference, $372,000, flows directly to the bank. That is the extraction fee. That is what mortgage interest means at scale. Not the bank covering their costs. Not a small administrative charge. $372,000 on a $280,000 loan in interest alone. And this doesn't include maintenance, 1 to 2% of home value per year. On a 350 home, that's $3,500 to $7,000 annually. Over 30 years, add somewhere between $105,000 and $210,000 more. A new roof here, an HVAC system there, the foundation issue nobody saw coming because the inspection was waived. Doesn't include closing costs when Tyler eventually sells. Realtor commissions alone run 5 to 6% of sale price. Add transfer taxes, attorney fees, and the staging company his realtor insists is non-negotiable. But renting is throwing money away. Now I can already hear the counter-argument forming in the comments. But the house appreciates. Tyler is building an asset. Yeah, let's run that number too. From 1990 to 2024, U.S. home prices appreciated at an average of approximately 4% per year. Sounds solid, right? Property goes up, equity builds, the American dream holds. Except inflation over that same period averaged roughly 2.5%. Real, inflation-adjusted return on residential housing, approximately 1.5% per year. 1.5. And that number assumes you hold through downturns. You don't need to sell at the wrong time, the local market cooperates, and you didn't buy somewhere that peaked and plateaued. Certain Midwest metros hit their ceiling in the mid-2000s. Certain Sunbelt markets boomed and then corrected hard. Detroit, Cleveland, parts of suburban Phoenix after 2008. The national average is doing a lot of work to cover a lot of situations where the math was quietly terrible for the individual in front of the decision. Now here's the number sitting right next to it. The broad U.S. stock market index. No special picks, no insider access, no timing the market, just showing up consistently, historically returned around 10% per year over that same period. About 7.5% after inflation. 1.5 versus 7.5. That is not a minor gap. That is not a rounding error. That is a difference that compounds over decades into completely different financial outcomes. The kind of difference that, over 30 years, means two people at the same starting point end up in completely different places, measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars. Potentially more, depending on the market and the consistency. And Tyler's $70,000 down payment, the one he spent 3 years building, just got locked inside a house where it earns real estate returns instead. Now, I'm not telling you what to do with that comparison. Historical averages are averages, not guarantees. Anyone who promises you a specific return on any investment is either wrong or lying. But the pattern is consistent enough and persistent enough across long enough time frames that dismissing it without running the math first is genuinely not a smart move. The question nobody runs out loud. What if Tyler had kept renting at $1,500 a month invested that $70,000 down payment, and then invested the $1,000 monthly difference between his old rent and his new ownership costs every single month, consistently. I'm not handing you a specific number and telling you that's what you'll earn. But that question has a real mathematical answer, and somehow, it never shows up in the stop renting conversation. Strange, right? Here's the third fear, and I think this one hits hardest for anyone between 22 and 28. Tyler is 24. A 30-year mortgage means Tyler is 54 when this loan closes, assuming he never refinances, never moves, never has a single life event that forces a change. And in 2025, for someone in their mid-20s, the probability of no life events in 30 years is basically a joke. Because here's what nobody puts a dollar value on. Tyler's options just collapsed. According to labor statistics, the average American between 25 and 34 changes jobs every 2.5 to 3 years. The remote work shift post-2020 has radically redistributed which cities offer the best opportunities across which industries. Entire sectors are restructuring. Finance, media, healthcare, technology, retail. None of these industries look the same as they did 5 years ago, and they won't look the same 5 years from now. So, Tyler's company might offer him a role in a city with significantly higher pay and better career trajectory in 18 months. He would need to sell, absorb transaction costs on both sides, typically 8 to 10% of the sale price between commissions and fees, and start over, or turn down the move. Locked. He might meet someone who lives somewhere completely different, in a different city, different state, different situation. Coordinating two lives when one of them is anchored to a specific address by a 6-figure loan is not a minor logistical challenge. Locked. The neighborhood he bought into, described as up and coming in the listing, and every listing describes every neighborhood as up and coming, might turn out to have been described that way since 2011. The coffee shop opens, then closes. The development falls through. He's underwater in a market that didn't cooperate. Locked. His industry restructures, and the best opportunities migrate somewhere he didn't anticipate. The move that would meaningfully accelerate his career requires geographic flexibility he no longer has. Locked. The conventional break-even timeline on a home purchase, factoring in transaction costs on both ends, has historically been around 5 years. In 2025, with elevated prices and higher rates, many analysts push that to 7 years in major metro markets. Some models put it at 8 or 9 in the most expensive cities, 7 to 9 years. That's Tyler's entire late 20s and the opening years of his 30s committed to one address, one city, one decision made with 24-year-old information, in one of the most rapidly shifting economic environments in recent memory. Flexibility. The actual ability to say yes to something unexpected, to move, to adapt without a financial penalty, has real economic value. It's just not a value that shows up on the balance sheet the NAR publishes. When someone tells you renting is throwing money away, they're implicitly telling you that flexibility is worthless. For a 24-year-old in 2025, with remote work reshaping geography, with entire industries restructuring in real time, it isn't worthless. It might be your most valuable asset. Now here's where I have to be straight with you, because I don't want to leave you in a mirror image of the same trap. I'm not running an anti-home ownership campaign. Buying a home can absolutely make sense. It makes sense when you have a real 7+ year plan in one place, when your price-to-rent ratio is reasonable, when the all-in monthly cost of ownership is close to what you'd pay in rent for something comparable, when the purchase doesn't drain your entire financial position and leave you one emergency away from crisis. When you actually want to stay, not because you feel like you're supposed to, but because the life you're building genuinely centers on that place. Those situations exist. Real people are in them. For them, running the numbers might produce a genuinely different answer, just not as often as the industry needs you to believe. So instead of a verdict, here are 3 questions that actually matter. Question 1. How long are you genuinely staying? Not how long you hope to stay. Not the optimistic version where everything works out perfectly. How long are you staying if the job market shifts, if the relationship changes, if the opportunity shows up in the wrong city? 5 to 7 years minimum is what you need to break even on transaction costs in most current markets. Some markets require longer. If you can't look at your life honestly and see that timeline clearly, the numbers are working against you before you even sign. And I think I'll want to stay is not a number. Your mortgage payment is a number. Your transaction costs are a number. Your break-even timeline is a number. Either the timeline supports the math or it doesn't. Write it down and see. Question 2. What is the price-to-rent ratio in your specific market? This is the number that actually tells you whether buying or renting makes more mathematical sense in a given location. The formula is simple. Take the purchase price of a comparable home. Divide it by the annual rent for an equivalent place. Below 15, buying can make mathematical sense. 15 to 20, it's situational. Run the full numbers carefully. Above 20, renting is almost always the stronger financial position. Not always, but the data is pretty consistent on this. In most major U.S. cities right now, that ratio sits above 25. In San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, Austin, Miami, above 30 in many cases. Some markets sit above 40. If you're in one of those markets and someone is calling your apartment a money pit, hand them a calculator and ask them to walk you through the math. Slowly. Because the math is not agreeing with their feelings. And if you're in a market where the ratio actually sits below 15, the conversation is genuinely different. There are still cities in the Midwest, parts of the South, smaller metros, where buying makes strong mathematical sense. The problem is, the advice doesn't come with that geographic asterisk. Renting is throwing money away, gets treated like a universal law, when it's actually deeply, specifically, location-dependent. Your city, your numbers. Question 3. What is your real total monthly cost of ownership? Not the mortgage payment. That's the lure on the trap. The actual number includes mortgage payment, property taxes, homeowner's insurance, HOA fees if applicable, average annual maintenance divided into monthly terms, and, this is the one everyone skips, the opportunity cost of the capital sitting locked in your down payment. That last one. $70,000 tied up in a down payment is $70,000 that is not compounding somewhere else. That foregone growth is a real cost, even if it doesn't show up on your monthly bank statement. It doesn't feel like a cost because you don't see it leave your account each month, but it is absolutely a cost. When you add all of that up and compare it honestly against local rent for equivalent housing quality, what is the actual gap? Write it down. That gap, invested consistently every month, is your alternative path. It is a specific number with specific mathematical potential. If the gap is $200 a month, the conversation looks different than if the gap is $1,000 a month. Run your number. Here's what the actual playbook looks like for someone between 22 and 28 in 2025. If your price-to-rent ratio is above 20. If you don't have a genuine 7+ year commitment to a location. If buying would require your entire savings for a down payment and push your monthly budget to its limits. If your industry is shifting, your career trajectory is still gaining speed, or you genuinely don't know where your best opportunities are going to emerge. Renting while consistently investing the difference is a real wealth-building strategy, not a consolation prize. Not I'll buy when I'm actually ready, not a failure mode. A deliberate, mathematically grounded strategy that a significant number of people who ended up financially ahead used in their 20s. The difference, invested over time, compounds. It doesn't compound dramatically month to month, which is part of why people don't see it working and assume they're losing. But the math underneath it runs in your direction, quietly, consistently, without requiring you to lock yourself to one address for a decade. The goal is not to never buy. The goal is to buy when the math supports it, in the right market, with the right timeline, with a real plan, for reasons that are yours. Not because an industry-funded emotional narrative embedded itself in your family's vocabulary before you were old enough to question it. Your generation is not bad with money. Your generation entered the market at a moment when price-to-rent ratios are historically stretched, when mortgage rates doubled in roughly 2 years, when down payment requirements on median homes require a larger share of median income than at almost any point in the past 4 decades. That's not a character flaw, that's arithmetic. And here is how you know when the conditions actually change. When your local price-to-rent ratio drops into a reasonable range. When you have a clear, honest 7+ year plan in one place. When the all-in monthly ownership cost is genuinely close to local rent for comparable housing. When you can make the purchase without eliminating your entire financial cushion and your entire flexibility in one transaction. When those conditions are true, the math shifts. Run the numbers then. Have the honest conversation then. The answer might genuinely be different, and if it is, great. Until then, you're not losing. You're staying liquid in a market that is actively trying to lock you in, extract your savings up front, and collect 30 years of interest on the rest. Staying liquid and investing the difference is not failure. It's the cheat code they forgot to put in the brochure. The next time someone tells you renting is throwing money away, ask them one thing. Ask them when they bought. Because a lot of the people handing you that line bought during an era of sub 4% rates, pre-pandemic prices, and price-to-rent ratios that made the math genuinely work in their favor. That was a real game with real math that pointed in a real direction. They're not lying. They're playing back a tape recorded in a different decade, with a different interest rate, in a different market, and handing you the headphones like the song hasn't changed. This is 2025. The board is different. The rates are different. The ratios are different. The rules written for their game do not automatically apply to yours. Don't let them play you with someone else's cheat codes. Now I want to hear from you. What city are you in? What is your local price-to-rent ratio? Drop it in the comments. If you're in a market where the math genuinely works for buying right now, I want to see it. Show me the numbers, not the feeling, the actual numbers. Purchase price, annual rent for equivalent housing, ratio. Let's run it together. And if you're in a market sitting above 25, and your family is still calling your apartment a money pit every holiday while passing the yams, you know what to say now. Don't let them play you. Listen to what they're actually saying.